The hand was already extended before Mary Carver even finished reading the letter. August Hunter stood in the doorway of the Dusty Creek Sheriff's Office, hat in one hand and the other stretched open toward her, palm up, fingers loose, like he was offering her something far more fragile than a handshake. His dark eyes held hers across the 10 feet of worn floorboards between them, and in that look was everything he had never once said aloud. No declaration. No speech rehearsed in the mirror of some lonely bunkhouse. Just that steady, quiet look and that open hand. And Mary was shaking, not from cold, not from fear of the man himself. She was shaking because the letter she held told her that her secret had been discovered, that the man who had been hunting her across 3 states had finally sent word to Dusty Creek, and that unless she ran tonight, she would be found by morning. The letter was written in the hand of a woman named Clara who worked the front desk of the telegraph office in Abilene, and Clara had underlined 2 words 3 times. He knows. 2 years. 2 years of hiding. 2 years of building something that felt, for the first time in her life, like it might be real. And now it was all going to collapse the moment Silas Drummond rode into Dusty Creek with his dark past and his darker motives. August still had not moved his hand. "You read it," she said. "It was not a question." "I read enough," he said. The lamplight carved shadows into his jaw, and she could see the muscle working there the way it always did when he was keeping himself very still. She had learned that about August Hunter over 17 months. That stillness was not absence. It was everything held in. "Then you know what he is," she said. "I know what he did to you," August said. "I've known for longer than you think." That stopped her. The letter crinkled in her tightening grip. The fire in the iron stove at the corner of the office crackled and popped, and the wind outside pushed at the warped shutters like something trying to get in. "How long?" she whispered. He lowered his hand slowly, not in defeat, more like a man setting something precious down with care, saving it for later. "We need to talk before he gets here," August said. "And then after we talk, you can decide what you want to do. I will not make that choice for you, but I need you to know everything first." Mary Carver pressed the letter against her chest and thought about the girl she had been in Missouri and the woman she had become in Texas, and how the distance between those 2 people was not measured in miles at all, but in secrets. So many secrets. She pulled out the chair across from his desk and sat down, and he sat across from her, and the night gathered itself around them while he began to speak. To understand what stood between them, you had to go back to the spring of 1878. Mary Carver had arrived in Dusty Creek, Texas on a Wednesday in April with a carpetbag that weighed more than it should have, and a story that did not quite add up. She told the woman at the boarding house, a wide-hipped, sharp-eyed woman named Dora Finch, that she was a widow from St. Louis looking for a quieter life. She said her husband had died of fever. She said she had no family left worth mentioning. Every word of it was a lie. Her real name was still Mary Carver. That much was true. But the rest of it was scaffolding built over a hole she could not afford to let anyone look into. She had not been widowed. She had run. Silas Drummond was not her husband, not legally, not in any church or courthouse. But he had believed she belonged to him the way a man believes a piece of land belongs to him when he has worked it long enough. He was 41 years old when Mary was 19, and he had courted her with the particular attention of a man who knew exactly what he wanted and had the patience of stone. Her father had been in debt to Drummond before the gambling took everything else, and by the time Mary understood the nature of the arrangement being made over her head, it had been nearly impossible to extract herself without cost. She had extracted herself anyway. She had taken what cash she could find, slipped out of a window in Kansas City on a moonless night in November of 1876, and she had been moving ever since. Kansas City to Wichita, Wichita to Dodge, Dodge to Amarillo, and finally Dusty Creek, which was small enough and far enough south that she had dared to hope Drummond's reach did not extend there. Dusty Creek was a town of roughly 400 souls spread across a dry valley where a creek ran most of the year and occasionally lied about it. There was a general store owned by the Hensley family, a barber shop, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, a saloon called the Cardinal that served better food than it did liquor, and the sheriff's office, which was occupied by a man named August Hunter who had held the badge for 3 years without a single serious complaint filed against him. Mary had first seen August on her 3rd day in town. She had been crossing the main street with a basket of goods from Hensley's when a horse tied loosely to the hitching rail outside the Cardinal startled at a passing wagon and reared back, snapping its rope and stepping directly into her path. She had not screamed. She had gone very still, which was the thing she did best, and she had watched the horse's hooves come down and settle 2 feet from where she stood. August Hunter had been the one to catch the horse's halter. He had stepped out of nothing, it seemed, calm as Sunday, and gathered the rope with one hand while the animal snorted and rolled its eyes, and he had looked over its neck at Mary with a measuring kind of look that was not unkind. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine," she said, which was her other most practiced answer. He had nodded once, handed the rope to a boy standing nearby, and walked on. She had watched him go. He was not the tallest man she had ever seen, but he carried himself with a density of purpose that made him seem larger than his actual height suggested. He wore the badge without vanity, pinned to a dark vest over a plain shirt. His hair was the color of good saddle leather, and his hands, she had noticed even then, were careful and deliberate in everything they did. She had asked Dora Finch about him that evening. "August Hunter," Dora said, ladling beans into a bowl like she was measuring them by some internal standard. "Came here from up north, Colorado way, I believe. Before that, nobody's entirely sure. He does not talk much about himself, which around here either means you're honest or hiding something. With him, I've always believed it was honest." She set the bowl down. "He's a good man. The town trusts him." "Does he have a family?" Mary asked, and then wished she had not. Dora had given her a sideways look, a look that said she had filed the question away. "No wife, no children that I know of. He keeps himself to himself." Over the following weeks, Mary had settled into the rhythms of Dusty Creek with the practiced invisibility of someone who had spent 2 years perfecting the art of being forgettable. She took a position helping Dora with the boarding house, cooking, laundering, keeping accounts. She attended Sunday services. She was polite and pleasant and gave nothing away. But the town had a way of pulling at you regardless. The first time she and August had actually spoken for more than 3 words was in June. She had been sitting on the front porch of the boarding house in the hour after supper when he had walked past, and something in the particular quality of the evening light, or perhaps some momentary collapse in her careful armor, had made her say, without planning to, "It smells like rain coming." August had stopped on the boardwalk and looked at the sky to the west, where a purple-gray bank of clouds was building over the low hills. "It does," he agreed. And then, instead of walking on, he had leaned against the porch railing and looked at the same sky. They had stood in that companionable silence for several minutes, and when the first real drops of rain came rattling down on the dry dirt of the street, they had both watched it with the kind of simple pleasure that the West reserved for the arrival of water. "I like this town," Mary said, surprising herself again. "It's a good one," August said. And there was something in the way he said it, some quiet ownership, like he had chosen Dusty Creek the same way she had, deliberately and with the knowledge of what he was leaving behind. She had not asked. He had not offered. But from that evening onward, something between them had shifted from strangers to something that did not yet have a name. Through the summer they had found excuses to occupy the same spaces. He had developed a habit of stopping at the boarding house on his evening rounds, ostensibly to check in with Dora about the town's goings-on. Mary had developed a habit of being on the porch when he came. They talked about weather, about the price of cattle, about a dispute between 2 neighboring ranchers over a water source that August was attempting to resolve without anyone getting shot. She listened to him with the full attention she usually kept hidden, and he listened to her the same way, like her words were not just conversation but something worth keeping. She learned things about him incrementally, the way you learn a place by walking it in small pieces. He had served briefly as a deputy in Denver before coming south. He had a younger sister in Colorado whom he wrote to once a month. He read more than anyone in Dusty Creek knew about, keeping a small collection of books on a shelf in his office that he lent out quietly to anyone who wanted them. He cooked passably well and did not complain about the cooking of others. He had opinions about horses that were strong and informed and delivered without arrogance. He never pushed her. That was the thing she noticed most acutely, because pushing was all she had known from the men in her life. Her father had pushed and bargained and arranged. Silas Drummond had pushed with a smiling patience that was somehow worse than overt aggression. But August Hunter seemed to operate on the conviction that people would tell you what they wanted you to know when they were ready, and that your job in the meantime was simply to be trustworthy enough that the telling became possible. It made her trust him in spite of herself, which terrified her. By August, she was actively afraid of how much she looked forward to seeing him. By September, she had stopped pretending to herself that it was anything other than what it was. She was in love with the sheriff of Dusty Creek, Texas, and she was keeping a secret that could destroy everything she had built here, and she did not know how to reconcile those two facts. He would have to know eventually. She understood that. The longer she waited, the worse the betrayal would feel to him. She had watched him long enough to know that August Hunter prized honesty above nearly everything else, not in a rigid, punishing way, but in the way of a man who had seen what dishonesty cost people and had decided that the cost was not worth it. But every time she formed the intention to tell him, the fear seized her. The fear that Silas Drummond would hear she had been talking and would come faster. The fear that August, good man though he was, would send her away because her presence was a danger to the town. The fear that he would look at her differently once he knew. She had not told him. She had told herself she would do it in October, then November, then after Christmas. And then, in February of 1879, Clara's letter had arrived, and the decision had been taken out of her hands. Now August was looking at her across his desk, the lamp burning low between them, and he was saying, "I have known since October." Mary stared at him. "A man came through in late September," August said. He kept his voice flat and even, like he was giving a report rather than dismantling everything she had believed about the past several months. He was asking around about a woman matching your description, said he was a concerned relative, said you had run off after a mental episode and he was trying to bring you home for your own safety. He paused. He did not come to me directly, which should have told me something. Who did he go to? Mary asked, though she suspected she knew. Harlan Cole. August's mouth tightened slightly. Harlan Cole was the owner of the Cardinal Saloon, a man who was technically law-abiding and socially pleasant and morally flexible in ways that occasionally aligned with inconvenient outcomes. Cole sent him on his way but mentioned it to me afterward, by way of gossip, I think. He did not connect it to you specifically. But you did. I did, August said. Not immediately, but I thought about it, and I started paying attention to things that I had already noticed but had not yet named. Mary felt the particular shame of being seen through, such as the way you position yourself with your back to walls, the way you know where every exit is in any room you enter, the way you go very still when you're frightened rather than moving. He said it without judgment, simply cataloging observed facts. Those are not the habits of a woman who has lived peacefully. They are the habits of a woman who has spent time being afraid. The silence between them had weight. And you said nothing, Mary said. It was not my story to tell, he said, or my secret to demand. She pressed her palms flat on the desk surface and studied them. Good strong hands she had always had, good for working. She had built those hands through years of practical labor, and she was proud of them. They were shaking now, very slightly at the outer edges. His name is Silas Drummond, she said. She had never said his name out loud to another person since leaving Kansas City, and the sound of it in this room felt like opening a jar that had been sealed too long. He is not my husband. He was never my husband-in-law, but my father owed him money and made an arrangement, and I was the settlement of that arrangement, and I did not agree to it. She met Auguste's eyes. I was 19. He was 41. August said nothing, but something in his expression changed. Not pity. She would not have tolerated pity. Something more like a door opening, a quiet admission of what she had said. I left in November of 1876, she continued. I took money that was partly mine and partly borrowed from a woman who helped me, and I ran. He has been looking for me since. He has resources and he has patience and he has, I think, a great deal of pride. I do not believe he actually wants me. I believe he wants to win. He'll have made arrangements with people along the way, August said. Men who will ask questions for money. That's how he found you here. Clara's letter says he sent someone through Abilene asking after me, Mary said. Clara works at the telegraph office. She remembered a description from 2 years ago when I came through, and she recognized it. She sent the letter as a warning. She took a risk doing it. How long does the letter say before he arrives? She does not know for certain. She sent the letter 3 days ago. She thinks he may follow it within the week. August leaned back in his chair. The lamplight shifted across his face, and she watched him think, watched the careful machinery of his mind working through the problem. He was not the kind of man who spoke until he had something worth saying. She had learned to be patient with that quality of his, had learned to read him in the pauses. You have 2 choices as I see it, he said finally. You run again, which means abandoning what you have built here and starting over somewhere else, with him closer behind you than he has ever been, or you stay and we face it together. The word together landed in the center of the room with a small, significant weight. Together, she repeated. He looked at her. That look. The one that had no calculation in it, no performance, no pretense. Just August Hunter in the plainest version of himself, looking at her with everything he had decided showing in his face for the first time. You are not alone in this unless you choose to be, he said. And Mary Carver, who had been alone for 2 years and alone before that in the ways that matter most, felt something break open in her chest like a window coming free of its frame in a strong wind. She did not cry. She had not cried since Missouri, since the night she climbed out of that window, and she was not going to start now. But her throat tightened and she had to look away for a moment, out through the office window to where the street lay dark and quiet and full of the night sounds of a small Texas town going about its honest sleep. What do you mean when you say together? She asked, because she needed to be precise about it. She needed it to be real, not a courtesy. I mean that this badge means something, August said. I mean that you have legal rights that Silas Drummond cannot override regardless of any arrangement your father made. I mean that if he comes here looking to take you by force or by intimidation, he will find that I have something to say about that. He paused. And I mean something beyond the badge as well. I think you know what I mean by that. She did know. She had known for months. She had been waiting to believe it was real. You should have told me you knew, she said. In October. Yes, he said simply, I should have. I was waiting for you to feel safe enough to tell me yourself. I waited too long, I'm sorry. The apology was direct and unadorned, and she accepted it the same way. I should have told you sooner, she said. I was afraid. I know. Not of you, she clarified, because it was important. I was not afraid of you specifically. I was afraid of what telling the truth costs. I have found that it costs a great deal. It does, he agreed, but keeping it costs more in the end. She thought about that. She thought about all the energy she had spent in the past 17 months maintaining the careful architecture of her invented past, the slight answers, the redirected questions, the way she had to think before every sentence to make sure she was not letting something slip through. How exhausting it had been, how completely and utterly exhausting. I'm tired, she said, and meant it in every possible way. I know, he said again, and the repetition of those 2 words was not empty. Each time he said them, they carried more weight. Outside, the wind had shifted and the distant sound of a dog barking carried across the dark. Mary was aware, acutely and with every nerve she possessed, that somewhere out there on one of the roads leading to Dusty Creek, or possibly already on the edge of town, Silas Drummond was moving toward her. She had spent 2 years running from him, and now she was sitting still, and the sitting still felt either like the bravest thing she had ever done or the most foolish. "What is your plan?" she asked. August had already been thinking about it. She could tell by the speed with which he answered. "Drummond has no legal authority here. Whatever arrangement your father made was not a legal binding contract. If he comes claiming any kind of rights over you, he is wrong in the eyes of Texas law, and I will tell him so directly." He folded his hands on the desk. "If he comes with men and attempts anything by force, then we have a different conversation, but I do not intend to get there unprepared." "He tends to have men," Mary said. "He is not the kind of person who does his own dirty work." "I expected that," August said. He opened his desk drawer and removed a folded piece of paper which he spread on the desk between them. It was a rough map of the roads leading into Dusty Creek. "There are 3 main approaches. I have deputies who can ride watch without it being obvious what they're watching for." "You've already been planning this," Mary said slowly. "Since Clara's letter arrived," he said. "Dora Finch brought it to me when she saw the Abilene postmark, because she knew you had come through there and she was worried. Dora knows." "Dora has suspected for some time," August said, and something in his tone told her that Dora Finch's suspicion had been entirely sympathetic. "She has not told anyone. She is not that kind of woman." Mary felt a complicated gratitude for the wide-hipped, sharp-eyed woman who had given her a room and asked no questions that required lies. "I do not want people to get hurt because of me," Mary said. It was not a small thing. It was the biggest thing she had been carrying. Every place she had stopped, she had lived with the knowledge that her presence was a potential fuse. She had tried to pass through those places quickly enough that the fuse would not be lit. Here she had stayed too long. Here she had grown roots she had not meant to grow, and now the fuse was lit regardless. "That is a noble concern," August said, "but it's not entirely your decision to make. The people of this town have a right to be protected, and they have a right to know what they're being protected from." He looked at her steadily. "And you have a right to be here. That is not a small thing either." Something about the way he said it, like it was simply true, like her right to occupy the space of her own life was not a privilege to be negotiated, made her eyes sting in a way that had nothing to do with the lamp smoke. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow, first light, I ride out and have a conversation with Bill Raines and Pete Alderman," he said, naming 2 ranchers whose properties bordered the main roads into town. "Both of them are men I trust. I ask them to keep their eyes open and send word if any strangers ride through." He refolded the map. "Then I come back and we go about our day, because we are not going to give anyone the satisfaction of watching us panic." She almost smiled at that last part. Almost. She stood and took her shawl from where she had laid it on the chair back, drawing it around her shoulders. The fire in the stove had burned lower, and the office had taken on the cooler temperature of deep night. She looked at the map, then at August, then at the floor for a moment while she organized what she needed to say. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to listen to it as a statement of fact, not as something that requires an immediate response." He waited. "I have spent a very large portion of the past 17 months making decisions based on the premise that nothing I was building here could last," she said. "Because of him, because of what I was carrying. And because I was building it on a lie, even a lie of omission, it felt like whatever was here was standing on sand." She met his eyes. "I am telling you now that I would like to stop building on sand. I am telling you that I am not going to run this time. And I am telling you that whatever I have felt in this past year and a half toward you was not part of my lie. That was the only honest thing I had, and I held on to it very carefully." August Hunter looked at her for a long moment. The lamp crackled. The wind pushed at the shutters. Far off, a coyote called. "I hear you," he said. "That means something to me." "Good," she said. "That is what I wanted." She walked to the door and stopped with her hand on the frame. "Should I stay at the boarding house, or would it be safer somewhere else?" "Stay at the boarding house," he said. "It is the most central location and the most visible. Drummond's approach depends on secrecy and isolation. We take both of those away from him." He paused. "And Dora's shotgun is not decorative." This time she did smile, briefly and genuine, and she stepped out into the night. The next 4 days passed in a state of suspended tension that was, paradoxically, some of the most alive days Mary had experienced in years, because she was no longer performing. The secret was out, at least between her and the people who mattered, and the performance she had maintained so exhaustively had been standing down, muscle by muscle, day by day. She felt the absence of it the way you feel the absence of a toothache you have had so long you had forgotten. It was not normal. She told Dora everything on the morning after her conversation with August, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee that was strong enough to stand a spoon in. And Dora listened with her hands wrapped around her cup and her eyes going through several precise emotional states, anger and sympathy, and a practical assessment of the situation that ended with her saying, "Well, the room has a bolt, and I'll put the shotgun by the back door." August's deputies, a wiry young man named Thomas Waite and a more seasoned hand named Cal Jessup, were brought into the information circle. Thomas was 23 and earnest, and reacted to the news with the eagerness of someone who had been hoping for a genuine assignment for some time. Cal was 40 and phlegmatic and said, "I wondered why we were watching the roads," and went about his preparations without further commentary. The town itself was not told the specifics. August had simply let word spread quietly that there might be some trouble coming in from outside, the kind of vague warning that frontier towns knew how to read without needing details. Windows got locked a little earlier. The blacksmith sharpened a few more things than usual. The Cardinal closed an hour sooner, and the customers who noticed it accepted the change without complaint. Mary continued her work at the boarding house. She cooked. She kept accounts. She took the occasional meal at the Cardinal with the same unhurried manner she had always cultivated, because August was right that removing Drummond's advantage of secrecy was the first step, and the second step was not behaving like prey. In the evenings, August came to the boarding house porch, and they talked in the way they had been talking for 17 months, except that now the invisible barrier between them was gone and they could speak in straight lines rather than circles. He told her about Colorado, about the years he had spent up north before coming south. He had been involved in a situation there, he said, a situation where a man with money and influence had done a great wrong to a family August had cared about, and the law had been too slow and too careful, and by the time it moved, the damage was already done. He had not broken his oath, he said, but he had come close. And afterward he had come south and taken a different badge in a smaller town where the wrongs were more manageable and where his judgment had room to operate before things became irreparable. "Is that why you help people before they ask?" Mary said. He considered this. "I suppose that is one way to see it." "I see it as a very good quality," she said. He looked at her sideways in the evening light. "Do you?" "You do not need to be surprised by the compliment," she said. "I am capable of them." "I know you are," he said. "You just give them rarely enough that they land with some weight." She thought about that. "I will take that as a compliment in return." It was meant as one. On the third night, sitting in the same spot with the same stars assembling themselves overhead in the immense Texas sky, he had said quietly, "I need you to know something. In the event that things become complicated in the next few days, I want this said." She had turned to look at him. "You came to this town and you were careful and you were quiet and you kept yourself at a distance because you had to," he said. "I watched that and I respected it. But what I saw under all of that was a woman who is steady and honest and who makes every space she occupies more decent by being in it. And I have been very aware, for longer than I admitted even to myself, that I did not want you to leave." The darkness between them had a particular quality right then, the quality of a moment that is happening and is also simultaneously becoming a memory, sealed and preserved before it has even finished occurring. "I did not want to leave either," she said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "After this is done, after Drummond is handled, I would like to have a different kind of conversation with you." "What kind?" "The kind about futures," he said. "What they might look like, if you were willing." Mary felt the warmth spread outward from her chest in every direction, to the tips of her fingers and the soles of her feet, the specific warmth of a hope you had not let yourself have suddenly being acknowledged as real. "I am willing," she said. "Good," he said. And they sat in silence for a while after that, the comfortable kind, the kind that does not need filling. Silas Drummond arrived on the 5th day. He came in the early afternoon, which was deliberately calculated, Mary recognized, because the early afternoon was when a town was at its most open, its defenses most relaxed, its people going about the ordinary business of the midday hours. He came with 2 men behind him, both of them the worn and weathered type that described themselves as various things depending on who was asking. He rode a good horse, a chestnut with excellent lines, because Drummond had always understood that the quality of what you carried was a statement of power. He was 44 now. He looked it. The years had thickened him in some places and carved him in others, and the combination had produced something that read as solid and dangerous. A man accustomed to getting what he wanted because he had built his entire life around the expectation of it. August was standing in the middle of the main street when they rode in, not conspicuously. Just present, the way a sheriff is present in his own territory, visible and unhurried. Mary watched from the window of the boarding house, which was positioned to give a clear angle on the street. Dora stood beside her, the shotgun propped against the wall but within arm's reach. Drummond pulled up in front of August and looked down at him from his horse with the expression of a man who had made a judgment before arriving and considered it already confirmed. "You the sheriff," he said. "August Hunter," August said, "sheriff of Dusty Creek. And you are?" "Silas Drummond out of Kansas City. I'm looking for a woman. Goes by Mary Carver. I have it on good authority she's been living in this town." "What's your business with her?" August asked. "Personal business," Drummond said. "Family matter. You a relation of hers?" There was a pause, a short one but detectable, in a manner of speaking. "What manner?" August said pleasantly. The pause was longer this time. One of Drummond's men shifted in his saddle. The other kept his eyes on the buildings with the professional attention of someone cataloging exits. "There was an arrangement made between her father and myself," Drummond said. "She left in violation of that arrangement. I am here to collect what is owed." "An arrangement," August repeated. He said it the way you repeat something you want the entire street to hear and turn over in their minds. Several people had stopped and were watching now, because in a small town, a conversation in the middle of the street had an audience whether you wanted it or not. What kind of arrangement involves collecting a grown woman like a piece of property? Drummond's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. He had not expected the challenge to be this direct or this public. He had, Mary understood, expected to arrive, present himself with authority, and have the matter handled quietly. He had not accounted for August Hunter. "I don't need to explain the particulars to a small-town badge," Drummond said, and the contempt in it was carefully placed, meant to diminish August's authority in the eyes of the watching townspeople. "That is an interesting position," August said, still pleasant. "Because in Texas, the law requires exactly that, the particulars, before a man can claim any authority over another person's movements." He looked up at Drummond with an expression of calm that had something iron underneath it. "Now, I'll say it once clearly. Mary Carver is a free woman living peacefully in this town. She has committed no crime. She is under no legal obligation to speak to you, accompany you, or acknowledge any arrangement made without her consent. If you have a legal document binding her to any person or situation, you are welcome to present it to me and I will have it reviewed. If you do not have such a document, then what you're describing is not a family matter. It's something else." Drummond stared at him. Then he looked across the street, toward the boarding house, and Mary made herself hold position at the window rather than stepping back. She met his gaze through the glass. Her hands were steady. She had made them steady by sheer intention. "She is here," Drummond said, spotting her. "She lives here," August said. "This is her town." There was a long moment. One of Drummond's men had his hand near his holster in the casual way that was not casual at all. Cal Jessup was visible at the corner of the livery barn, and Thomas Waite was somewhere behind Drummond's party, having positioned himself there in the morning as arranged. Drummond was doing the mathematics. 2 armed men plus himself against a sheriff, at least 2 visible deputies, and a town that had clearly been prepared for this conversation. The mathematics did not favor him, and the public nature of the confrontation had removed the tool of intimidation, because everything he said here was being heard and would be repeated, and a man who presented himself as a legitimate businessman could not afford to have certain things said out loud and confirmed. "I want to speak with her," Drummond said. The tone had shifted, still hard, still demanding, but recalibrated towards something that could pass as reasonable. August looked toward the boarding house. Mary had already stepped out onto the porch, because she had decided during those 5 days of preparation that she would not hide, that if this confrontation was happening she would be present for it as herself and not as a figure at a window. She came down the steps and crossed the street slowly, holding his gaze the whole way, and she stopped at August's left shoulder. "You wanted to speak to me," she said. Drummond looked at her with an expression that was layered in ways that took her years to understand but which she could read now. Entitlement and frustration and something that was not love, had never been love, but which in the particular psychology of a man like Drummond functioned like love in that it would not release its grip. "Mary, this has gone on long enough. Come home." "I am home," she said. "This is my home now." My father made an arrangement that I was not party to and did not consent to," she said. "My father died in 1878 of liver failure, and whatever debt he had died with him. I know the law well enough to know that I am not liable for his debts, and I am not bound by any agreement he made about my person." She had rehearsed this, with August's help in the evenings on the porch, going over the legal ground carefully so that, when the moment came, she could speak it without hesitation or error. "I am not going anywhere with you, Silas. I was never going anywhere with you." Something in Drummond's face went hard and smooth, the face of a man sealing himself off from an outcome he refused to accept. He started to say something. "Mr. Drummond," August said, cutting across it with a voice that was pleasant in the same way a closed gate is pleasant. "I'm going to ask you and your men to put up at the hotel for the night if you need rest, or to ride on if you don't. Either way, this conversation is done. You have no legal standing here, and I will not be accommodating anything beyond the common hospitality of the town." He let a pause settle. "If I hear of any attempt to approach or interfere with Miss Carver or any resident of this town, I will be considerably less friendly about it." Drummond sat on his horse for another long moment. His jaw worked. His hands tightened on the reins. Then he pulled his horse's head around and spoke to his men in a low voice, and the 3 of them rode slowly down the street. Mary watched them go. She was aware that the watching townspeople were exhaling around her. She was aware that her own hands were shaking now, very slightly, in the aftermath of the adrenaline. August moved to stand beside her, close enough that his arm brushed hers. "He will not leave tonight," August said quietly. "He'll stay and think and then decide whether it's worth pressing further. By morning he'll know it isn't." "How can you be sure?" "Because men like that protect their reputation above everything else," he said. Coming here was supposed to be neat and quiet. It was not neat and quiet. Pushing further only makes it worse for him. He was right. Drummond and his men took rooms at the hotel, the only hotel in Dusty Creek, a 6-room establishment above the hardware store. Cal and Thomas kept watch through the night in shifts. Nothing happened. At dawn, Drummond rode out with his men, heading northeast, and by the time the town had finished its breakfast he was a memory. Mary stood in the street and watched the direction he had gone until the dust settled and the horizon was clear. "Is it over?" she asked, when August came to stand beside her. "I think so," he said. "He's a proud man. He won't come back for a second humiliation, especially not once word gets around about what happened here. A man like that depends on people not knowing how he operates." He turned to look at her. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. And then, because she was done with the habit of that single syllable as a deflection, she added, "I mean that actually. I am genuinely all right." The relief that moved through her was enormous and slow, like a river changing course, the way large things change direction, not all at once but with the whole weight of themselves shifting gradually into the new direction, the right direction. It was on a Wednesday evening in late March of 1879, when the air had that particular quality of early spring in Texas, warm in the sunlight and cool where it wasn't, and the first of the wildflowers had come up along the margins of the road leading out of town, that August asked her to walk with him. They had been walking together in the evenings often enough that this was not unusual, but something was different about this particular evening. He was quieter than his usual quiet. He had the manner of a man who had organized himself for something. She let him have the silence and walked beside him along the road that ran east out of town, past the church schoolhouse and the small graveyard behind it, and along the gentle rise of land where, in another month, the grass would be truly green. The sun was going down in the particular extravagant way of Texas sunsets, painting everything in shades of orange and deep rose. He stopped at the top of the small rise and looked out at the valley below, at the town, at the thin silver thread of the creek catching the last light. Then he turned to look at her. That look. She had come to know it in all its variations, the thoughtful one, the amused one, the intent one he got when he was working through a problem. This one was different from all of those. This one was stripped down to its foundation. No armor, no careful management. Just August looking at her the way he looked at this land, like it was something he had chosen and was grateful for. He reached out his hand, palm up, fingers loose, an offering, not a demand. And in that open hand and that quiet look was everything he had not said and did not need to say. The past 17 months of slow trust built in honest pieces. The 5 days of holding the line together against a threat that had followed her for 2 years. The evenings on the porch talking about weather and futures and the kind of people they intended to be. The particular decision he had made, she understood now, not to use words that were borrowed from some conventional script, not to produce a speech that was adequate to the situation, because he did not trust borrowed language with the things that mattered most to him. He trusted this. The direct and simple offering of himself. She looked at his hand and then at his face. The sun was nearly gone and the first stars were appearing in the deep blue overhead, and the air smelled of dry grass and the faint sweetness of those early wildflowers, and somewhere back in town, a dog barked twice and was quiet. She reached out and put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Warm, steady, the kind of grip that was not about strength but about certainty. "Yes," she said. "Yes," he agreed, and the corner of his mouth came up in that rare, full smile she had seen perhaps a dozen times in 17 months, and which she intended, from this point forward, to see considerably more often. They stood there at the top of the rise, while the last of the light left the sky and the valley below lit its lamps, one by one, small golden points of warmth against the dark. Mary Carver was 23 years old, and she was standing in a Texas spring evening with her hand in the hand of a man who had never once asked her to be different than she was, and she was, for the first time in a very long time, completely without fear. The months that followed had a quality she had no prior experience of. Not the suspended alertness of hiding, not the exhausting performance of a false history, but the simple and profound dailiness of a life being built with intention. August spoke to Reverend Hartwell, who ran the church schoolhouse, about the marriage, and the Reverend asked very few questions beyond those that were required, which Mary suspected was not accidental, but the result of some prior conversation between the Reverend and August that she was not privy to but was quietly grateful for. Dora Finch, when told, made a sound that managed to combine satisfaction and vindication in approximately equal measure. "I have been waiting for one of you to say it plainly for months," she said. "It was quite trying." "I appreciate your patience," Mary said, not quite managing to suppress the laugh. "You are very welcome," Dora said, and went back to her pot on the stove with the satisfied bearing of a woman whose faith in the natural order had been confirmed. The wedding itself was held on a Saturday in May, in the church schoolhouse, with the morning sun coming through the east windows and the smell of bluebonnets coming in from outside. Mary wore a dress that she and Dora had made together over 3 weeks, a practical affair of good blue wool with white at the collar and cuffs, nothing showy, but cut well and pressed perfectly, and she felt, wearing it precisely as she wanted to feel, like herself. August wore his good vest and a clean white shirt, and he had combed his hair into a state of relative order that she found endearing given how little he generally attended to it. He was waiting at the front of the church when she came in, and the look on his face when he saw her was not the polite appreciation of ceremony but something more personal, more direct, the same look he had given her on that rise in March, that look of a man who has made a choice he is entirely at peace with. Most of the town came. Dusty Creek was a town of 400, and there were perhaps 250 of them packed into the church schoolhouse that morning, overflowing onto the steps and the yard, because in a small town a wedding is a communal event, and everyone had watched these two people navigate the long, slow process of finding each other, and everyone felt some proprietary satisfaction in the official recognition of it. Thomas Waite cried. Cal Jessup stood in the back with his arms crossed, and an expression of determined stoicism that his damp eyes contradicted. Reverend Hartwell kept the service brief, as was his custom, because he believed the ceremony was the beginning of the thing and not the thing itself, and he said the words in his plain and honest way, and August and Mary said theirs. When August kissed her at the end of it, the room made a sound that was part cheer and part collective exhale. They moved into August's house, which was small but solid, built from good lumber with a covered porch on the east side where the morning sun came in. It had 2 rooms downstairs and 1 large one up, and a kitchen that was functional rather than charming, and a yard with 2 live oaks that were old enough to have been there before the house was. Mary had opinions about the kitchen. She communicated these opinions constructively, and August, who had no particular attachment to the kitchen's existing condition, gave her entirely free rein and helped her implement the changes on 2 successive Saturdays with the collaborative good nature of a man who understood that his role in this project was primarily structural support. She planted a garden in the yard, sheltered from the drying west wind by the fence and the live oaks, and grew tomatoes and peppers, and the beans she had learned to cultivate in Missouri before everything had changed. August, who had expressed no prior interest in gardening, became unexpectedly invested in the progress of the tomatoes and began checking on them with a frequency that Mary found completely charming. Life in Dusty Creek found its rhythms. August kept his badge, and Mary found over time that she had strong feelings about the administration of justice in small towns, and that August had the good sense to listen to those feelings with genuine attention. She had, as it turned out, a sharp legal mind born partly of necessity and partly of innate temperament, and she became the unofficial source of reference for certain practical legal questions among the women of the town, questions that often had nowhere else to go. She and Dora remained close. She and Cal Jessup developed a mutual respect based on the shared understanding that neither of them used words carelessly. Thomas Waite, who she had come to think of with something like sisterly affection, came for Sunday dinners with the regularity of a habit and brought increasingly large quantities of food to contribute, which suggested that he was not entirely sure what the etiquette of Sunday dinner visits required, but was determined to err on the side of generosity. Dora told her one afternoon, over coffee in the boarding-house kitchen, that she had heard through the regional network of communication that tends to operate through certain specific women in every town that Silas Drummond had married someone else the previous autumn. A woman from a well-established Kansas City family, properly courted with a proper arrangement. Dora delivered this information with a delicacy that suggested she was watching Mary's reaction, Mary considered it for a moment. Then she said, "I hope she is treated better than I was, and I hope she knows her own mind well enough to make a real choice." Dora nodded, satisfied with this response, and poured more coffee. In the winter of 1879, Mary realized she was expecting a child. She told August on a Tuesday morning before he left for the office, holding the information in her hands the way she held the information about anything important, as a thing to be delivered clearly and without unnecessary surrounding material. August had gone still in the way he went still when something mattered. Then he had looked at her with an expression she had never quite seen on him before, an expression that belonged to a category of feeling that did not have adequate language, some combination of wonder and fear and a kind of gratitude so large it had nowhere to go. He had not said anything for a full 10 seconds. Then he said, "Are you all right? Physically, I mean." "How are you feeling?" She had laughed, which she had not expected to do but which was entirely the right response to August Hunter's version of joy expressing itself as a health inquiry. "I am fine," she said. "I am better than fine." He crossed the kitchen and took her face in his hands and looked at her the same way he had looked at her on the evening rise in March, and then he pulled her close and held her with a care that was not delicate but profound, the kind of holding that said, "You are real, this is real. I'm not going to pretend this is less than it is." "A family," he said very quietly into her hair. "Yes," she said. Dora was told and reacted with predictable satisfaction. The Reverend was told and offered prayers that were genuine rather than formulaic. The town knew within the week, because in Dusty Creek information moved like water and found every available channel, and the response of the town was, in its collective way, warm. The pregnancy was uncomplicated in most respects but thoroughly exhausting, and Mary approached it with the same practical steadiness she brought to most things, reading what she could find on the subject, establishing a relationship with the doctor in the next town over who came through Dusty Creek twice a month, and maintaining her various responsibilities without treating herself as either fragile or indestructible. August was attentive in ways that were characteristically practical rather than hovering. He reorganized certain domestic arrangements without being asked, made sure there was always water in the house, took over the heavier garden work in spring without comment, and began quietly learning more about the process of childbirth than most men of that era and that region considered relevant to their domain. Thomas Waite, when informed, immediately offered to build something. He built a small rocking cradle from cedar that was better work than anyone had expected from him, and which he delivered with the diffident pride of a man who had spent considerable effort on something, without wanting to acknowledge the extent of the effort. The boy was born in August, which was the same month as his father's name, a coincidence that gave the town considerable delight. They named him Samuel James Hunter, Samuel for August's father who had died when August was young, and James for no particular reason, except that it settled well beside Samuel, and they both liked the sound of it. Samuel was a healthy, loud, opinionated person from approximately his first hour of life, with dark eyes like his father, and a set of opinions about his own comfort that he communicated with great enthusiasm and absolute clarity. August held him with the same careful, deliberate quality that marked everything he did, the look on his face during that first holding being something Mary filed away in the permanent and most important category of memories. Parenthood suited them both, though it suited them differently. Mary took to it with a competence that had room in it for the full complexity of the experience, the profound love and the grinding exhaustion, and the strange particular joy of watching a person develop the specific features of their own character. August took to it with a gravity and tenderness that she had suspected was in him but which was, seeing it in practice, still moving to witness. Samuel grew. He learned to walk at 10 months, and immediately began applying his mobility to the investigation of every corner of the house and yard, with a thoroughness that required constant supervision, and occasionally caused August to stand in the kitchen with the expression of a man who had successfully managed a town for 3 years and was finding a 1-year-old to be a worthy opponent. Dusty Creek grew as well, slowly and in the way of frontier towns, a few new families, a small expansion of Hensley's general store, the addition of a proper doctor's practice when the doctor from the next town over decided Dusty Creek was large enough to merit a permanent presence. The railroad had come through a town 40 miles east, and there was discussion about a spur line that might eventually reach Dusty Creek, and the discussions were passionate and divided in the way frontier town discussions about progress usually were. August remained sheriff, and Mary remained an unofficial but significant presence in the civic life of the town. She had begun, by 1881, to help with the schoolhouse in practical terms, not as a teacher in any formal capacity, but as someone who organized the supply of books and materials and who sat with children who were struggling with reading in the evenings when they were brought by their parents with the specific request that someone patient help. She had a gift for it. Not a sentimental gift, not the cooing indulgence of someone who found children charming in the abstract, but a real and practical gift for understanding where in a process someone had gotten lost and finding the specific point at which to re-enter and rebuild the foundation. Several children in Dusty Creek who would otherwise have struggled through years of difficulty in literacy came out the other side of their time with Mary Carver Hunter with a solid and lasting capability, and their parents knew whom to thank. Thomas Waite, at the age of 26, became engaged to a young woman named Eliza Marsh, who had come to Dusty Creek with her widowed mother, and who had the excellent quality of giving Thomas back exactly as much conversation as he gave her, which kept things balanced in a way his previous social interactions had not managed. Mary and August were extremely pleased about this development and told Thomas so, which made him go red and look out a window for approximately 2 minutes before recovering his composure. Cal Jessup remained phlegmatic and reliable, and occasionally brought Samuel interesting rocks from places he had ridden through, which Samuel received with the gravity of someone who understood that rocks were serious business. In the spring of 1882, Mary found herself expecting a second time. This pregnancy was different from the first in that she was more tired and less patient with the tired, having a 2-year-old whose energy was not reduced by her condition. Samuel was a comprehensive presence in the house and required comprehensive engagement, and there were days in the second trimester when she sat in the kitchen at the end of the afternoon with her hands flat on the table and simply held still for 10 minutes as a form of survival strategy. August observed this and made adjustments. He brought Samuel to the office with him on certain mornings, which Samuel found to be of great interest, particularly the horses, and which the deputies found to be of moderate disruption and mild delight. He arranged for Samuel to spend regular time with Dora Finch, who had a seemingly inexhaustible reservoir of energy when it came to small children, and who presided over Samuel's visits with the authority of someone very sure of their own household rules. The second child was a girl. Born in October of 1882, she had her mother's steady quality from the beginning, that capacity for watchful stillness that in Mary was the result of hard experience, but in this small person seemed to be simply innate, a built-in quality of attentive observation. They named her Ruth Eleanor Hunter. Ruth was, from the beginning, different from Samuel in the same way that Mary was different from August, which was to say that she was quieter and her observations more precise, and she appeared to be continuously filing away information for later use. Samuel found his sister initially baffling and eventually fascinating, and the relationship between them developed into the particular mixture of negotiation and alliance and intermittent conflict that characterizes siblings who are fundamentally compatible but different in temperament. By 1883, the house that had been 2 rooms down and 1 up was clearly a size smaller than the family required, and August undertook a careful expansion with the help of several men from town over a summer of weekends, adding a room on the east side that got the morning light, and a proper covered back porch that became, in the evenings, the family's primary outdoor room. Mary planted climbing roses along the back porch rail, a yellow variety that she had found through a seed catalog that was beginning to reach even towns as small as Dusty Creek. And by the following summer, they were beginning to establish themselves, and by the summer after that, they were a genuine feature of the house, blooming every spring and attracting bees from what seemed like an unreasonable geographic radius. It was on a Tuesday evening in the summer of 1884 that Mary and August were sitting on that back porch while the children were inside, and the light was the long gold of a Texas summer evening, and she was looking at the roses and thinking about the particular path that had led from a window in Kansas City to this porch with these roses and this man beside her. "What are you thinking about?" August asked. "The night I left Missouri," she said. He looked at her, waiting. "I was so afraid that night," she said, "not of getting caught, of what I was leaving toward. I had no idea what it would look like." She turned to look at him. "I could not have imagined this. Good afraid or bad afraid?" He asked. "I did not know yet," she said. "I think it turned out to be good afraid, the kind that means you are moving toward something rather than just away from something." "You made a very brave choice," he said. "I made a desperate choice," she said. "They are not always the same thing." "Sometimes they are the same thing," he said. "Sometimes being desperate is what gives you the push to do the brave thing that you would not have done otherwise." She considered this. The evening air moved through the roses, and the smell of them was warm and sweet. Inside the house, Samuel's voice rose briefly in what sounded like the ongoing negotiation of some tour-related dispute, then settled. "I have never told you properly what it meant to me," she said. "That evening in the office, when you held your hand out." August looked at her steadily. "You did not say anything grand," she said. "You did not make a speech or produce reasons or ask in a way that required a performance of any kind. You just looked at me and opened your hand. And it was," she searched for the word and found it, "it was exactly right. It was exactly what I needed. Because the thing I needed was not to be convinced or persuaded or charmed. The thing I needed was for someone to simply be honest and present and to let me choose." August was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I was afraid you would say no." She looked at him in genuine surprise. "You were." "I had built a very thorough argument in my head," he said, "for what I would say if the hand alone was not sufficient. I had 3 further points prepared." She started laughing. The laugh came from a genuine place, from the image of August Hunter standing in that cold office with 3 carefully prepared arguments for why she should take his hand, and the faith he had placed in the single quiet gesture instead. "What were the 3 points?" she asked. "I am not sure they are relevant now," he said, straight-faced. "August." He looked at the roses for a moment with an expression of deep consideration. "The first was practical in nature." Something about the advantages of August Hunter. He looked at her and the corner of his mouth came up. "I threw them away when you reached for my hand," he said. "They became entirely irrelevant." She reached over and took his hand. She did it the same way she had done it then, simply directly, without performance. His fingers closed around hers the same way, warm, certain. "For what it is worth," she said, "you would not have needed them." "That is very good to know," he said. They sat as the evening settled and the stars began to appear and the voices of their children moved inside the house, and the roses shifted gently in the evening wind, and there was nothing hidden between them and nothing unresolved, and nothing that needed saying that had not been said. Thomas Waite married Eliza Marsh in September of 1884 in the same church schoolhouse where August and Mary had married 5 years earlier, and it was, everyone agreed, a very good wedding. Samuel Hunter, age 4, served as a ring bearer with the seriousness of someone who understood he had been given a significant responsibility and was determined to execute it correctly. Ruth Hunter, age 2, attended in the arms of her mother and regarded the proceedings with her characteristic attentive silence. Cal Jessup cried again. He maintained that he had something in his eye on both occasions and would maintain this position for the rest of his life, and everyone accepted it. In 1885, Reverend Hartwell retired and moved to live with his daughter in San Antonio, and the church council engaged a younger man, a reverend prior, who was energetic and progressive in certain respects, and who almost immediately organized a campaign to have the church and the schoolhouse separated into distinct buildings, since the arrangement of sharing a structure had always been a compromise of function for both institutions. The campaign was successful within a year, and the new schoolhouse was built on the north end of the main street and was a genuine improvement on the shared space. With a proper schoolhouse came the need for a proper teacher, and it was Mary who made the case, clearly and in a public meeting that she attended without August, because she wanted it to be her argument and not his endorsement, that the teacher should be paid properly and should have a professional understanding of pedagogy, and should not simply be whoever in town had the most time available. The town council, which consisted of 5 men who ranged from visionary to resistant in their general orientation toward change, debated this for 2 meetings and ultimately agreed. A teacher was found, a woman named Grace Fulton, who had trained at a normal school in Missouri, and who arrived in Dusty Creek with a trunk full of books and a quality of organized enthusiasm that Samuel Hunter found immediately compelling. Mary approved of Grace Fulton thoroughly and said so, and the 2 women developed a friendship built around books and children, and a shared conviction that education in small frontier towns was not a luxury but a foundation. In the spring of 1886, Mary began to suspect she was expecting a 3rd time. This was confirmed by the 2nd month, and received by both of them with the particular equilibrium of people who have done this before and know what it involves, and are genuinely glad of it while also being entirely clear-eyed about what it demands. Samuel, at 5, was informed with appropriate simplicity that there was a new baby coming, and he accepted this information with the equanimity of someone who had already done the adjustment once with Ruth and had emerged from the experience with his position secured, and some additional people to interact with. Ruth, at 3, was harder to explain it to and easier to simply show when the time came. The 3rd child was born in November of 1886, another boy, and they named him Daniel William Hunter. Daniel was, from the very beginning, a person of decided opinions and great physical energy, which distinguished him usefully from both Samuel's steady temperament and Ruth's quiet observance, and which kept the household at a consistent level of alert engagement. August, holding Daniel in the first hour of his life with the same expression he had worn holding Samuel and Ruth, the expression of a man confronting something larger than his usual scope, said quietly, "3." "3," Mary agreed, from where she lay against the pillow with the exhaustion of labor on her but her eyes clear. "That is a number," he said. "It is a very specific number, yes," she said. He looked at her over the baby's head and smiled the full smile, the rare and complete one. "We are doing well," he said. "We are," she agreed. There was a great deal of truth in that statement. They were doing well in every sense that mattered. The house was full and warm and real. The town was theirs in the way a town becomes yours when you have invested in it for years and it has invested back. The garden grew. The roses bloomed. The children were healthy and distinct, and growing into their own natures in ways that were sometimes astonishing and sometimes exhausting, and always interesting. August remained sheriff for 2 more years, and then in 1888, when the position of county judge became vacant, a delegation of people from the wider region came to August and made a case that lasted 3 weeks and involved several long conversations on that back porch and at least one extended discussion while he was checking on the tomatoes. Mary had an opinion about the judgeship. She delivered it over dinner one evening when the children were in bed, and the house was quiet in the particular productive way of households that contain sleeping children rather than the absence of children. You have spent 10 years as sheriff because you believe in the specific and immediate application of fair treatment, she said. The judgeship is a broader application of the same belief, more difficult in some ways, more lasting in others. She looked at him across the table. You should take it. He looked at her for a moment. You have already decided, he said. I have an opinion, she said. I am telling you my opinion. Your opinion has significant weight with me, he said. I know, she said. That's why I am giving it directly rather than letting you come to it on your own over the next 3 months. He had a full smile at that. 3 months. At minimum, she said. You are deliberate, not slow, but deliberate. About some things. This is accurate, he conceded. He took the judgeship. Thomas Waite, who had been August's deputy for years, took the sheriff's badge, which the town approved of because Thomas had grown into a serious and reliable man who had inherited August's approach to the office without being a copy of it. The work of a county judge in Texas in 1888 was varied and demanded precisely the qualities August had spent a decade developing: the patience, the legal rigor, the ability to hold the full complexity of a situation without reducing it to convenience. He was good at it in the same way he had been good at being sheriff, thoroughly and without drama. The family continued to grow in the non-numerical sense. Samuel started school with Miss Fulton in 1885 and was her best reader within 2 months, a fact she reported to Mary with the particular satisfaction of a teacher who can identify her pupil's specific abilities early. Ruth followed him to school 2 years later and distinguished herself in mathematics with the same quiet precision she brought to everything. Daniel entered school in 1891 and immediately became known for asking questions that were either very stupid or very insightful, and there was genuine debate among the adults of the town about which category predominated. The town of Dusty Creek, by 1890, had grown to something closer to 700 souls. The spur line had come. There was a proper bank. There were 2 doctors and a dentist. The general store had expanded into a dry goods establishment of genuine size. The schoolhouse had been expanded twice. The Cardinal Saloon had been bought and renovated by new owners who had kept the name, but improved the food. Dora Finch remained at the boarding house, now with a young woman named Anna helping her, and she remained a fixed point of the town's social landscape, with the same sharp eyes and measured speech and complete reliability that had always characterized her. She was 63 in 1890, and she moved a little slower, and the arthritis in her hands was noticeable. But her mind was exactly as it had always been, and her affection for the Hunter family was constant and demonstrated practically, through Sunday dinners, and the occasional appearance of exactly the thing that was needed before you had known you needed it. Samuel Hunter, by 1893, was 13 years old and beginning to grow into the height that would eventually distinguish him as notably tall, and he had developed a deep interest in the law that was perhaps inevitable and perhaps simply innate, and he spent time in August's court when he was allowed with the concentrated attention of someone discovering a vocation. Ruth, at 11, had moved from mathematics into a broader interest in science and natural history, and maintained a correspondence with a woman in Austin who was associated with a university and who had been reached through the remarkable network of Grace Fulton, who seemed to know everyone in Texas who had ever read a book seriously. Daniel, at 7, had definitively resolved the question of stupidity versus insight in favor of insight, though the insights were delivered in a package that involved a great deal of motion and not infrequently some minor property damage, which was managed with the philosophical acceptance of parents who knew the specific child they were dealing with. One evening in the summer of 1893, Mary was in the garden in the long summer dusk, checking on the tomatoes because the season had been dry and they required attention, and she was aware of August coming out of the house and sitting on the porch steps behind her, and she finished what she was doing before turning to look at him. He was watching her with that look, the one from the rise in March of 1879. The one from the first hour of Samuel's life. The one from across a cold sheriff's office with a letter about betrayal and hidden motives and dark pursuit. Except now, it had 14 years in it. 14 years of the ordinary and extraordinary particulars of a life built together, and the look had all of that accumulated in it, not in a heavy way but in the way of things that have grown deep roots, secure and present and reaching. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That you are remarkable," he said simply. She brushed the dirt from her hands and came to sit beside him on the steps. The children were inside. The roses were blooming on the porch rail, the fourth summer of blooming, reliably and generously as they always did. The live oaks in the yard made their slow sound in the evening air. "I was thinking about when I first came here," she said. "Who I was when I arrived." "Frightened," he said. "Frightened and capable and very well organized about hiding both of those things," she said. "You have never been someone who hid the capability," he said. "That was always visible." She leaned against him slightly. He shifted to accommodate it in the natural way of people who have done this so many times it has become a single practiced movement. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "When you held your hand out in that office, I did not know if I was making the right choice," she said. "I mean, I felt it. I felt it with the whole of myself. But I did not have any evidence that it was the right choice because I had never had the experience of any choice like it working out. Everything I had chosen or been given before had been calculated or coerced, or had gone wrong in the particular ways that things go wrong when the foundation is dishonest." "And now?" he asked. "Now I have 14 years of evidence," she said. 14 years of it working out in ways I could not have imagined from that office in March. 3 children and a house with roses and a town that is ours, and she paused and looked up at the first appearing stars, and you, all of you, exactly as you are. She turned to look at him. "It was the right choice. I want you to know that I know that." August looked at her for a long moment. The particular quality of his attention that she had spent 14 years learning and loving, the steadiness of it, the absence of performance was fully present. "It was the right choice," he agreed, "for both of us." She took his hand. He closed his around hers. The stars continued to appear, one by one and then in their dozens. The immense Texas sky opening itself above the small house with its live oaks and its roses, above the town of Dusty Creek going about its evening, above the wide country that stretched in every direction, dark and spacious and real. Inside the house, Samuel was reading by lamplight at the kitchen table with the absorbed posture of someone lost in the particular country of a book. Ruth had fallen asleep over her own book in the small room that got the morning light, her hand still on the open page. Daniel was almost certainly still awake and engaged in something involving his extensive collection of small rocks, and the taxonomy he had invented for them that bore no relationship to any known geological system, but which had its own rigorous internal logic. August Hunter, county judge of Dusty Creek, sat on the porch steps of his house with his wife's hand in his, in the summer dark of 1893, and listened to the sound of his family existing in the warm light behind him. Mary Carver Hunter sat beside him and looked at the stars and thought about the girl who had climbed out of a window in the dark in Missouri 17 years ago with a carpetbag and a cold terror and not one single reason to believe that the future held anything except more running. She sent that girl a thought of the uncomplicated, genuine kind that does not require language. Something that was simply, look. Look what was waiting. Look what was possible. You were right to go. The roses moved on the railing. The stars multiplied above. Somewhere in the distance, the creek ran silver through the dark land, faithful and quiet, the way it did in the good years when the rains had come. Inside, Daniel called out something unintelligible and then laughed at his own joke. August turned his head slightly toward the sound, and she could feel the smile in the stillness of his profile before she saw it. She brought his hand up and held it against her cheek for a moment, his warm and careful hand. the hand that had been extended in a cold office in a moment of dark pursuit and hidden secrets and all the weight of 2 years of running, extended palm up and fingers loose, not demanding, not coercing, simply offering. That hand. "We should go in," she said. "We should," he agreed. But they sat a little longer first, in the good quiet in the dark that held no threat anymore, in the life they had built in an open and honest way from a single honest gesture between two people who had decided, each in their own way and for their own reasons, that the truth was worth the cost and the trust was worth the risk. The creek ran, the stars burned, the roses held, and it was enough, it was more than enough, it was everything.